The boarding call echoed through the airport speakers. I looked down at the ticket in my hand and the agent shook her head. "This seat doesn't exist, ma'am." When I turned, I saw my son already disappearing beyond the checkpoint, his wife smirking over her shoulder. That was the instant I knew I had been written out of their story. But how did it come to this? Tell me, if your own child erased you like an unwanted passenger, would you walk away in silence? Or would you fight back in a way they would never forget? I chose the second. And here's how it happened. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 72 years old, and just 2 months ago, I buried my husband, Henry. We had been married for 42 years. When you've shared that much life with someone, silence doesn't just feel quiet, it feels like a punishment. After the funeral, everyone went back to their own routines. Neighbors brought casseroles for a week, church ladies sent flowers, and then the phone stopped ringing. The house was still full of Henry's things, but without him, every room felt empty. The ticking clock on the wall became my loudest companion. Each second reminded me he wasn't sitting in his chair anymore. His chair? It's still in the living room, with the cushion slanted from his weight. I haven't touched it. His slippers are still parked at the edge of the rug, pointed toward the kitchen like he might walk in at any moment. I tell myself I'll put them away tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. I walk past them every morning whispering, "Good morning, Henry," like he might answer me back. Sometimes, when the house gets too still, I almost hear him humming off key, asking where I hid the cinnamon. Then I remember. He's gone. At dinner time, I set one plate. Just one. His side of the table stays bare. Someone cleared it after the service, said it would be easier for me, but easier isn't the same as better. Looking at that empty space across from me cuts deeper than setting it every night ever could. Grief makes you remember strange things. I keep replaying our 25th anniversary. Henry came home late, covered in dust from work, holding 45 roses, one for every year we'd known each other. He grinned, embarrassed, because the bouquet was lopsided, but I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I wore the blue dress he loved. He spun me around in the kitchen until I laughed so hard I cried. That night I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Now, that same dress hangs in the back of my closet, untouched, as lifeless as I feel when I see it. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, stopped by. She held out a casserole dish and spoke in that soft, pitying tone people use when they don't know what else to say. "Clara, at least you still have David. A son is a blessing, you know. He'll take care of you." I smiled because that's what widows are supposed to do. But when I closed the door, her words sank heavy in my chest. "At least you have David." She meant well, but she didn't see what I saw. The way David's visits had grown shorter, how Rachel, his wife, rarely looked me in the eye. They didn't feel like blessings anymore. They felt like people tolerating me. The truth is, I already felt like a burden. Not because anyone said it outright, but because of the sighs, the polite smiles, the way my name slipped out of conversations like I wasn't part of the family anymore. That night, I sat in Henry's chair and stared at the slippers by the rug. The clock ticked, louder than ever. For the first time since the funeral, I whispered to myself, maybe I wasn't just mourning Henry. Maybe I was mourning the family I thought I still had. A week after Mrs. Caldwell brought her casserole, David and Rachel came by. I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day Henry and I used to spend in the garden, him pruning the roses while I baked pies for church. The knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, there they stood, David shifting from foot to foot, and Rachel with that perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mom," Rachel said brightly, her voice warm in a way that felt rehearsed. "You've been cooped up here too long. It's not healthy. We've been talking, and we think it would be good for you to get away. Florida, a family trip, sun, sand, fresh air. It'll do wonders." David nodded quickly, almost too quickly, like a student agreeing with the teacher. "Yeah, Mom, it'd be nice. A change of scenery, you know." He looked at me only for a second before his eyes slid away to the floor. I stood there, holding onto the edge of the doorframe, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to refuse. The thought of packing a suitcase without Henry's shirts folded inside, of walking through airport gates alone, terrified me. But another part, the lonely part that ached every night at the empty dinner table, wanted to believe this was an olive branch. That maybe they wanted me, not just tolerated me. "Florida," I whispered. "Are you sure?" Rachel stepped forward, gently brushing a speck of lint from David's sleeve, her hand lingering in that quiet display of control. "Of course we're sure. Family needs to stick together after a loss. Don't you think Henry would want that for you? Hearing Henry's name fall from her lips like a tool, like a lever to move me, made my stomach twist. Still, I nodded. Yes, I suppose he would. Rachel's smile widened, triumphant. Good. It'll be wonderful. We'll handle all the arrangements. You don't need to worry about a thing. But later that night, as I sat at the kitchen table with the ticking clock echoing through the house, I realized I did worry. Not about the flights or the hotel, about the cost. I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want them whispering that I had tagged along for free, so I opened the drawer of my dresser and pulled out the small velvet box I hadn't touched since the funeral. Inside lay the ring Henry had given me on our 25th anniversary. I remembered the day as if it were painted in gold. He had come home late, sheepish, with grease still on his hands from the garage. He pulled me into the living room and dropped to one knee, holding out the tiny box. "Clara Whitmore," he said with that crooked grin of his, "would you marry me again for another 25 years? I had laughed through tears as he slid the ring onto my finger. It wasn't big, just a simple gold band with a small stone, but it carried every promise he had ever kept. I wore it every day until the day he died. Now I turned it over in my palm, the metal cool against my skin. My hands shook as I closed the box and tucked it into my purse. The next morning I walked down to the pawn shop on Main Street. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up, startled at first, then softened when he saw the box. "You sure, ma'am?" he asked, opening it carefully. I swallowed hard. "I'm sure." He weighed it, scribbled numbers, and slid a few bills across the counter. I took them even as my throat tightened and stuffed them into my purse. I told myself it was worth it, that being included in this trip, being part of something again, was worth the price of letting go. On the walk home, the spring air felt sharp, almost mocking. Every step echoed like betrayal. I clutched my purse against my chest and whispered, "It's okay, Clara. It's just a ring. What matters is being with family." But when I walked back into the empty house, the silence answered me louder than any voice could. I hadn't sold just a ring. I had sold the last piece of proof that Henry had loved me for a lifetime, and I had done it just to make sure my own son didn't see me as baggage. That night, I laid the cash on the table and stared at it for a long time. The numbers didn't comfort me. They looked like cold replacements for warmth that could never be bought again. I folded the bills and told myself the lie I needed to believe. If this is the price of being included, then at least I'll finally belong. The morning of the trip, I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have. I had chosen my gray wool coat, the one Henry always said made me look dignified like a senator's wife. Around my neck, I wrapped the faded blue scarf I'd worn on our last vacation together, the scarf that still smelled faintly of his aftershave if I pressed it close enough. I wanted to look presentable, not like a widow who had forgotten how to live. David honked the car horn from the driveway, sharp and impatient. I grabbed my small purse, the same one I'd carried for 20 years, and stepped outside. They were already in the front seats of the SUV, Rachel behind the wheel, sunglasses perched on her head even though it was cloudy, and David in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone. "Morning, Mom," David said quickly, not looking up. Rachel's smile was perfect, her lipstick unsmudged, her tone cheerful. "Ready for some sunshine?" I nodded, though my hands clutched the strap of my purse a little too tightly. The drive to the airport was quiet, filled mostly with the sound of Rachel talking about dinner reservations and hotel amenities. David chuckled occasionally, but his eyes stayed on his phone. I stared out the window at the passing trees, telling myself over and over, "This is good. This is family time. You belong here." Nashville International buzzed with its usual chaos, rolling suitcases clattering on tile floors, loudspeaker announcements echoing overhead, children crying, businessmen striding with purpose. For a moment, the energy almost lifted me. I thought, maybe this really would help. Maybe they were right. We walked together toward the check-in counter. Rachel's luggage was gleaming, designer with golden tags that read priority. David had a sleek black roller bag. My hands clutched only the printed itinerary they had given me. Rachel stepped up first. "2 bags to Miami," she said smoothly, sliding her tickets across. The agent nodded, printing tags, efficient. David followed. Then it was my turn. I handed over the paper, smiling nervously. The woman at the counter typed a few keys, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see a return flight under your name." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'm traveling with my family, Whitmore. It should be there." She tried again, her fingers clicking against the keyboard. "There's a Whitmore group booking, yes, but the return flights are only for 2 passengers." She looked up, her eyes softening, pity edging into her professional smile. I'm sorry. You don't appear to have a seat back. My stomach dropped. That can't be right. I turned, searching for David and Rachel. They were already a few steps away, gathering their things. My voice cracked. David? He paused, shifted awkwardly, but didn't move closer. Rachel, on the other hand, pivoted with a sigh. She pulled her sunglasses down over her eyes and spoke loudly enough for the agent and anyone within earshot to hear. Mom, don't make a scene. We only bought you a one-way ticket. You'll figure it out. Her words landed like a slap. I froze, the paper trembling in my hands. The agent's eyes darted between us, uncomfortable. Travelers glanced over, then looked away quickly, pretending not to hear. Heat flushed up my neck. I stammered. A one-way? But I thought... Rachel cut me off, her voice smooth, almost bored. Flights are expensive, and you've got plenty of time. You're retired? Stay longer if you want, or sell your phone, buy a bus ticket. You'll figure it out. Behind her, David adjusted his sunglasses, staring at the floor. He didn't meet my eyes, not once. I wanted him to say something, anything. Mom, of course you have a return. Mom, this is a mistake. Mom, come with us. But he said nothing. His silence screamed louder than her cruelty. The line behind me shifted impatiently. A man coughed. A child whined. The world moved forward while I stood still, clutching an itinerary that meant nothing. Rachel turned without waiting for my response. Come on, David. We'll miss our boarding group. And just like that, they walked away, through the security line into the tunnel of gates and coffee shops and glossy vacation smiles, without me. I remained at the counter, the agent murmuring something I couldn't hear, my ears ringing. My purse strap dug into my shoulder. My breath came shallow. For the first time in my 72 years, I felt invisible to the very people I had given everything to. I must have stood there frozen for longer than I realized. The boarding line behind me shuffled forward, impatient. People brushed past, their shoulders bumping mine, some muttering apologies, others too wrapped up in their own worlds to notice me at all. I held that flimsy piece of paper in my hand like it could anchor me, though it had already been proven worthless. The airport didn't care about my heartbreak. Its rhythm carried on, relentless. Loudspeakers cracked overhead with sharp announcements. Now boarding Group B for Flight 526 to Atlanta. The metallic voice echoed through the terminal, bouncing against glass and tile. Suitcases rattled across the floor in every direction, their plastic wheels sounding like distant thunder. Children shrieked, parents barked orders, and somewhere I heard the hiss of a coffee machine followed by laughter. Life was moving, loud and fast. And me? I was stuck in place, abandoned by my own son and his wife, just steps away from me, as if I didn't even exist. I turned slightly, catching my reflection in the polished surface of a giant advertisement board, some smiling family holding beach towels, sunburned and happy. The irony stung. In my reflection, my gray coat looked stiff, my scarf uneven, my face pale. I didn't look like a woman about to go on vacation. I looked like a stray, misplaced in a world that no longer had a seat for her. A young woman walked by, dragging a bright pink suitcase. She glanced at me and gave a quick, polite smile, but when her eyes flicked to my empty hands, no luggage, no boarding pass, that smile crumbled into pity. She ducked her head and rushed on. That small look cut deeper than Rachel's words. Strangers already saw me as discarded. I stumbled away from the counter, needing somewhere to sit before my knees gave out. A wooden bench waited near the security line. I sank onto it, clutching my purse tight against my chest like a life vest. The bench was hard, the edges biting into my back. Above me, the tall windows let in a flood of cold, sterile light. It poured across the floor, spotlighting me in a way I never wanted. I felt like I was on display, an old woman left behind, a story everyone could see but no one dared to touch. And then, like an old wound tearing open, I remembered another time I had been left waiting. I was 9 years old again. My father had promised me a trip into town. We'll get ice cream, he'd said, and maybe stop by that shop with the pretty ribbons. I had been so excited. I put on my best dress, the little white one with blue flowers, and polished my shoes until they shone. I sat on the porch steps, legs swinging, humming to myself. He said he'd be back by noon. I remember the sun climbing high, the way the wooden steps grew hotter and hotter against the backs of my legs. My stomach had twisted with hunger, but I refused to move. He said noon, so I stayed. Every car that passed on the dirt road sent my heart racing, but none of them slowed. The hours dragged on. The shadows stretched long. I remember the sound of cicadas screaming in the trees, the sky turning from blue to gold. My mother eventually came out, her face sharp, her voice harder than her hands on my shoulder. "Stop waiting, Clara. He's not coming." But I stayed a little longer, just in case. The moment it sank in, the moment I understood he had chosen not to come back, was like something breaking in me that never fully healed. That day, I learned what it felt like to be disposable. And now, decades later, I felt it all over again. My own son, the boy I had raised and protected, was now repeating the same wound his grandfather had left in me. The airport noise blurred together, a storm of sound without meaning. I rocked slightly on the bench without realizing it, holding my purse tighter and tighter. People streamed around me, families greeting each other with hugs, business travelers rushing to catch connections, children clinging to their parents. All of them seemed to belong somewhere. I felt like the only person in that terminal who didn't. A janitor pushing a cart paused near me for a moment. His eyes flicked over, lingering just long enough for me to see the question there. Is she lost? Before he looked away quickly, pretending not to notice. Even kindness was too much trouble. I wasn't anyone's responsibility. Shame crawled through me, hot and unrelenting. Not just because Rachel had humiliated me, but because David had said nothing. My David, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had walked to school every morning, the boy who once told me I was his best friend. He had stood silent, eyes on the ground, letting his wife dismiss me like trash. The pain of his silence was worse than Rachel's words. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling the pounding of my heart beneath my scarf. Tears prickled but refused to fall. This wasn't crying anymore. It was something heavier. Numbness. A void so deep it felt like I might sink right through the bench and vanish. For a fleeting moment I imagined getting up, running to security, calling out after them. "Wait, please don't leave me like this." But pride pinned me down. I couldn't beg. Not again. I had begged once already at 9 years old, sitting on those porch steps for hours. That silent begging had broken me back then. I wouldn't give them that power again. So I sat, still as stone, while the tide of travelers flowed around me. The strap of my purse dug deep into my palm. The windows glared with sharp sunlight, turning everything too bright, too harsh. I whispered under my breath so softly I wasn't even sure I heard it myself. Not again. I won't be left behind again. And in that cold, merciless light of the Nashville airport, a hard truth settled in my chest. Grief wasn't just about losing Henry. It was about losing every illusion I had clung to. That family meant safety, that blood-guaranteed loyalty, that a mother's love would always be repaid in kind. It didn't. And as the next boarding call rang out over the loudspeakers, my heart hardened around that truth. Smaller than I had felt in decades, yes, but sharper too. Because when the people you trust most treat you as disposable, you only have two choices: vanish completely or find a way to rise. I sat on that wooden bench so long my legs went numb. People kept moving, the airport never stopped. Gate announcements rolled on one after another, flights to Orlando, Dallas, Chicago. Everyone had a destination. Everyone except me. For a moment I thought maybe I should just go home. Call a cab, drag myself back to that empty house, crawl into Henry's chair, and let the silence swallow me whole. That's what Rachel wanted, wasn't it? For me to disappear quietly, too tired to cause any trouble. But then my hand brushed against something inside my coat pocket, a small, stiff edge of cardstock. My fingers fumbled and pulled it out. It was a business card, yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded. Walter Hayes, attorney at law. I stared at it like it had appeared out of nowhere. In a way, it had. I'd forgotten I even kept it tucked there, safe inside the lining of my coat. Henry had given it to me years ago, pressing it into my hand with that serious look he wore only when he meant something. "Clara, if anything ever happens to me and you feel lost, go to Walter. He'll help you. He's not just a lawyer, he's a friend." At the time, I laughed it off. "Henry, you're not going anywhere." But he only smiled, tucking the card back into my coat. "Keep it, just in case." And here I was, sitting alone at 72, abandoned by my son, discarded by my daughter-in-law, clutching that card like a lifeline from the man I'd lost. I traced my finger over Walter's name, remembering the last time I seen him. It was at our 40th anniversary party. He'd stood in the backyard with Henry, the two of them laughing like schoolboys, glasses of bourbon in their hands. They had known each other since their army days, brothers in everything but blood. If Henry trusted Walter, maybe I could too. The thought scared me. My whole life I'd been told to keep the peace, to forgive, to endure for the sake of family. Mothers don't fight back, they sacrifice. That's the role I had played for decades, but sitting there, humiliated in front of strangers, I realized sacrifice had turned me into nothing more than an afterthought. Rachel's words rang in my ears again. "We only bought you a one-way ticket. You'll figure it out." No, not this time. My father had left me waiting on those porch steps. My son had left me sitting in that terminal, but I would not keep waiting. I would not keep begging. Slowly, I straightened my back. My knees creaked as I pushed myself up from the bench. I adjusted the scarf at my neck, tugged my coat tight around me, and slid Walter's card safely back into my pocket, pressing it against my chest. For the first time that day, I lifted my chin. The glass doors of the terminal loomed ahead, opening and closing automatically as passengers streamed through with their rolling suitcases and hurried steps. I walked toward them. Each step felt heavy, but also certain, like I was walking out of more than just an airport. I wasn't leaving behind only a failed trip. I was leaving behind the version of me who waited quietly, who accepted whatever scraps of love were thrown her way. As the cold Tennessee air hit my face outside, I gripped the strap of my purse tighter, the sound of taxis honking, luggage wheels rattling over pavement, the smell of gasoline, all of it felt like a new beginning. Rachel thought she'd left me with nothing, but she was wrong. I had Henry's words, I had Walter's card, and I had a choice. I don't remember the cab ride clearly, only the blur of streets through the window. Fast food signs, gas stations, the same stretches of Tennessee Road Henry and I had driven 100 times. My fingers never let go of Walter's card. I pressed it against my palm until the edges dug into my skin, as if pain could keep me awake, keep me steady. When the car finally stopped in front of the low brick building with the faded sign that read, "Hayes and Associates, Attorney at Law," my stomach twisted. The last time I had walked through those doors, Henry had been beside me. We were signing our first will, laughing nervously because it felt strange to talk about death when life still felt so full. Back then, the plan was simple. Everything to each other, and then to David. We were so certain. So sure. I paid the driver, stepped out, and adjusted my scarf. The office looked smaller than I remembered, older too. Paint chipped on the doorframe, blinds a little crooked. But the moment I pushed the door open, the familiar smell of old books and polished wood wrapped around me. Walter looked up from his desk, glasses perched on his nose, hair grayer than the last time I saw him. His eyes widened, and for a second he just stared. Then he stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Clara Whitmore?" he said, voice rough with surprise. "Well, I'll be damned. It's been years." I managed a small nod. "Hello, Walter." He came around the desk and reached for my hands, holding them gently but firmly. "I'm so sorry about Henry. I heard, but I didn't know how to reach you. He was—" Walter's voice cracked and he cleared his throat. "He was one of the best men I ever knew." That broke something in me. I blinked fast, but the tears slipped anyway. "Yes," I whispered. "He was." He guided me to a chair. "Sit down, please. Tell me what brings you here." I hesitated. My pride wanted me to stay composed, but the weight of the morning came crashing out. David and Rachel, they left me at the airport, with no return ticket, no luggage, nothing. My voice shook, but I forced it steady. Like I was baggage they didn't want anymore. Walter's brows drew together, his jaw tightening. "They did what?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "They walked away. And I realized, I've lost more than Henry. I've lost the family I thought I still had." For a long moment, silence hung between us. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall filled the space. Then Walter sat back slowly, exhaling. Henry always worried about this. Not in so many words, but he knew Rachel wasn't kind to you. He told me once, after a golf game, that if push ever came to shove, he wanted me to look after you. That memory hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. "He said that?" Walter nodded. "Yes, and I promised him I would. I didn't think the day would come so soon." He leaned forward. "Clara, you don't have to go through this powerless. You've got options, but you need to decide what you want." I thought of Henry again, of all the nights he reassured me when life got hard. "You're stronger than you think, Clara." He had said it when I miscarried, when I lost my mother, when bills stacked too high. And here in Walter's office, I felt those words again. I wiped my cheeks and straightened my shoulders. "I've cried enough," I said, my voice clearer now. "It's time to act." Walter studied me for a long moment, then gave a single firm nod. "That's the Clara I remember. The one Henry fell in love with. The one who never backed down when something mattered." He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a thin folder, laying it on the desk between us. "We drew up your will years ago. Everything went to David. Do you still want that?" I stared at the folder. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from resolve. "No, not anymore." Walter didn't flinch. "Then tell me what you want." I thought about Rachel's smirk at the airport, about David's silence, about the young woman's pitying smile when she saw me without a bag. The humiliation burned, but beneath it something steadier grew. "I want to take them out of it," I said firmly. "Both of them. I don't want my son and his wife to inherit a thing, not after what they've done." Walter leaned back, studying me with cautious respect. "You're sure? That's not a light choice." "I'm sure," I said. My voice didn't waver. I gave them everything I had for years, my time, my money, my love, and today they showed me exactly how much that meant to them. "Nothing. So that's what they'll get in return." Walter nodded slowly, tapping his pen against the desk. "All right then. We'll make the changes. But, Clara..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This isn't just about cutting them off. It's about what you leave behind. What do you want your legacy to be?" The word lingered in the air. Legacy. I thought of Henry's laugh, the garden we planted together, the quilt my mother made, the ring I had sold just to be included in a trip that wasn't real. I looked Walter in the eye. "I want my legacy to mean something. I don't want it to go to people who threw me away. I want it to go somewhere it matters." A small smile tugged at the corner of Walter's mouth. "That sounds like the Henry I knew. And it sounds like you, too." We sat there a moment longer, the air thick with memory and resolve. Then Walter opened his folder, clicked his pen, and said quietly, "Let's begin." Walter slid the old folder across the desk. The brown leather cover was worn, the corners frayed from years in storage. He flipped it open, and there it was. The will Henry and I had signed more than a decade ago. "Everything to each other," Walter said quietly, running his finger down the page, "and then to David." The words stared back at me like a promise already broken. I remembered the day we signed it, Henry's warm hand covering mine, both of us smiling at how simple it all seemed. We never imagined a world where our only child would turn his back on me. Walter's voice broke through my thoughts. "Do you still want this?" I hesitated. My heart squeezed, torn between memories of David as a little boy and the man who had walked away hours earlier. I saw him at 5 years old holding up a finger painting, grinning when I taped it to the fridge. I saw him at 16, slamming doors during arguments but still asking me to fix his torn baseball uniform. I saw him at 30, walking down the aisle with Rachel, proud and nervous, looking back at me as if to say, "See, Mom? I made it." And then I saw him at 72, my 72, standing at the airport, silent while his wife discarded me like trash. Walter leaned forward. His eyes were steady but kind. "Clara, do you want to forgive them? Is there a part of you that can?" My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes, because mothers are supposed to forgive. We're told it's what makes us good. But forgiveness without respect isn't forgiveness at all, it's surrender. I shook my head slowly. I can't forgive contempt. I can't forgive being treated as if I were nothing. Not anymore. Walter didn't push, he simply nodded. "Then we change it." He set a fresh document in front of me, blank except for the header. "We'll draft a new will. Who do you want as your beneficiary?" I had thought about this before, in the quiet nights after Henry died when the house felt too big. I had once picked up a pamphlet at the community center, Elder Haven, a nonprofit helping older adults who had been abandoned or financially exploited by their families. At the time, I hadn't imagined needing them myself, but now the name burned bright in my mind. "I want it all to go to Elder Haven," I said firmly. "The house, the land, the savings, every last bit." Walter raised his brows but didn't argue. He scribbled notes. "All right. We'll need to file the paperwork, but it's absolutely possible." I exhaled, the weight in my chest shifting. For the first time that day, I felt like I was reclaiming something. Walter set down his pen. You know, Henry once told me you had more backbone than anyone he'd ever met. I think he'd be proud of this. I smiled faintly. He used to say I was stubborn. Same thing, Walter chuckled softly. Then, as the papers took shape, Walter asked, would you like to include a personal letter? Something to explain why in your own words? I thought for a long moment. Yes. Yes, I wanted that. Not for David or Rachel, they'd never understand. But for someone else. Someone like me, sitting alone years from now, believing they were invisible. Walter slid a sheet of stationery toward me. I picked up the pen. My hand shook, but the words came steady. To the one reading this, if you are here, it means you know the ache of being cast aside. You know what it feels like to give everything and still be told you are too much or not enough. I want you to know you are not invisible. You are not a burden. You are not worthless. You are valuable. Your story matters. And if my name or my legacy helps keep you safe, helps you find shelter or strength, then know this. You were the reason I chose differently. You are the proof that even when blood turns cold, compassion can live on. I signed my name at the bottom, Clara Whitmore. Tears blurred the ink, but my heart felt clearer than it had in months. When I handed the letter to Walter, his eyes softened. That's powerful, Clara. That's more than a will. That's a legacy. I sat back in my chair, breathing deeply. For so long, I had felt powerless, discarded. Now, with just a few strokes of ink, I had turned my pain into something that might one day protect someone else. Rachel thought she'd left me with nothing. But she was wrong. I still had a choice. And I had just made it. The next hour moved in deliberate strokes, the kind of time you can measure with the scratch of a pen and the weight of a stamp. Walter's office filled with the quiet rhythm of law, papers sliding across the desk, pens clicking, pages turning. He read each clause aloud, his voice steady, his glasses slipping down his nose. Section 2, revised, primary beneficiary removed, assets reassigned. The words sounded cold, but I clung to them like lifelines. With every line he crossed out, every name he replaced, I felt something loosening in my chest. When he finished drafting, he called in a notary, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. She introduced herself quickly, professional but warm. I handed her my ID, my hand steady now, not shaking like it had at the airport. She verified, stamped, signed. The sound of her notary seal clicking down onto the page was like a gavel striking. Final, unshakable. Walter gathered the stack of papers, thick with signatures and stamps, and tapped them neatly on the desk. That's it, he said quietly. It's official. He stood, walked across the room to a tall black safe in the corner. I watched as he unlocked it, the metal door creaking open. Inside were rows of files, wills, deeds, the private futures of countless families. Walter slid my documents into a fresh folder, labeled it Whitmore, Clara, and placed it on the middle shelf. Then he shut the door with a heavy thud, spun the dial, and locked it tight. The sound echoed in the small office. Something inside me echoed too, like a chain had broken. Walter turned back to me. They can't touch it now. Not a word of this can be undone without you. I nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it. For months I had felt powerless, tossed around by grief and condescension. But sitting there, watching that safe lock shut, I realized I had taken something back. Control, dignity, my name. I exhaled, and for the first time in days, I felt air fill my lungs without choking me. Walter tilted his head, studying me. How do you feel? I leaned back in my chair, surprised by the curve tugging at my lips. It wasn't a laugh, not yet. But it was the first smile I'd allowed myself since Henry died. I looked at Walter, my voice steady, calm, almost defiant. They could leave me at the airport, but I've left them out of the future. The words hung in the room like a verdict, and for the first time since that morning, I didn't feel like baggage. I felt like someone who had finally packed her own suitcase and chosen where she was going. Walter smiled faintly, almost in relief. Henry would be proud of you, Clara. I held his gaze, my smile lingering, and whispered more to myself than to him. And I'm proud of me, too. It didn't take long. Just 3 days after I left Walter's office, the ripple reached them. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, vibrating against the wood like a trapped insect. The screen lit up with David's name again and again, call after call, I let them ring. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, not the voice that had stayed silent when I needed it most. By the afternoon, the call stopped. Then came the email. The subject line read, "Mom, at least let us keep the garden." My stomach tightened. Even before opening it, I knew the words inside would not be about remorse. Not really. They would be about loss, their loss, not mine. I clicked it open. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Rachel and I got the letter from the lawyer this morning, and I'm still in shock. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we didn't handle things at the airport right. Tanya says it wasn't meant to feel like abandonment. She just thought you'd prefer to stay a few extra days. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but still. Mom, this is serious. You've taken us out of everything. The house, the savings, the land. Even the joint account we used for the kids' school fees is frozen. I'm not saying we didn't make mistakes, but cutting us out completely, after everything, after all the years, it feels like too much. Please, if nothing else, let us keep the land behind the house, the garden. The kids helped plant it. It means something to them. Please. Just one call. Just 5 minutes. David." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Slower. "We didn't think you'd actually go through with it." That single sentence told me everything. They thought I was too old, too weak, too desperate for scraps of affection to take real action. They had mistaken my kindness for fragility, my silence for obedience. They had gambled that I would never choose myself over them. And now, they were stunned that I had. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Not the soft ones of David as a boy, but the sharp ones of the airport. His silence while Rachel dismissed me. His eyes avoiding mine. The humiliation of standing alone with no ticket, no luggage, no place in their world. That was the real garden they had planted. One of neglect, watered with indifference, growing weeds of contempt. The irony of his plea almost made me laugh. The garden. The one Rachel boasted about online, posting filtered photos with captions about our sacred space. Not once did she mention my name, though I'd pulled weeds in that soil long before she came along. Not once did she invite me to sit with them there, and now they wanted it as their consolation prize. I stared at the words on the screen, feeling the urge to respond rise and fall like a wave. I could type one sentence, clean and final, no. Or I could write paragraphs about loyalty, respect, and how they had thrown both away. But I didn't. Instead, I simply closed the laptop. The click of it shutting was louder than any reply I could give. Silence, after all, can be the strongest answer. I sat back in my chair, the afternoon light spilling through the window. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of being ignored. I felt the power of ignoring them. They had left me at an airport with nothing. And now, I had left them with exactly what they had given me. Emptiness. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them land. I didn't owe them anything at all. And so, I let the silence stand. The movers arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was warming the dew on the grass. I had called a company from 2 towns over so there would be no gossip, no familiar faces whispering about poor Clara Whitmore. The men were polite, strong, and efficient. But before they could step inside, I stopped them at the door. "I'm only taking a few things," I said. "Just what matters." They nodded, waiting for my instructions. I led them to the living room first. Henry's chair sat by the window, worn perfectly to the shape of his back. The fabric was frayed at the arms where his hands had rested during decades of evenings spent reading or dozing off mid-conversation. I ran my palm over it one last time, remembering the countless nights I'd sit across from him, listening to his voice rumble about politics, weather, or nothing at all. "This one," I whispered. "Careful with it." Next, I pulled a small box from the cabinet. Inside were our wedding album and a few framed photographs. Henry in his Navy uniform, me in that simple lace dress, David as a baby swaddled in Henry's arms. I remembered turning those pages with Henry on our 40th anniversary, laughing about our hairstyles, marveling at how quickly the decades had passed. I handed the box to the movers gently, as if it contained something fragile because it did, my past. In the bedroom, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. There it was, the quilt my mother had stitched by hand, every square sewn from scraps of dresses and shirts we'd outgrown. It had warmed us through lean winters, been draped across our laps during storms, wrapped around David when he was sick. The fabric was faded, but every stitch held a memory. "This comes with me," I told the men, folding it with reverence. Then came the harder part, walking through each room and saying goodbye. In the kitchen, the smell of Henry's favorite cinnamon toast still clung faintly to the air. I could almost see him standing by the stove, butter knife in hand, humming off-key. This was the room where I'd spent years cooking Sunday roasts, teaching David how to measure flour, celebrating birthdays with homemade cakes. The cabinet still held mugs we'd collected from trips, each one a souvenir of a place we had loved. I touched the counter, letting my fingers rest there longer than I should have, before stepping back. The living room was next. This was where we had danced barefoot on our anniversary nights, tipsy from cheap wine, laughing until we collapsed onto the couch. It was also where I taught David to read, tracing letters in his picture books while he leaned against my shoulder. I could still hear his little boy voice struggling over words, the way he'd cheer when he finally got one right. The rug bore faint stains from spilled cocoa, stains I never scrubbed out completely because they reminded me of family. The hallway. That was the hardest. That was where Henry had collapsed that morning, the coffee mug slipping from his hand, the steam still rising as I knelt beside him screaming his name. The paramedics had carried him out from there. The memory hit me so hard I had to grip the wall to steady myself. I stood in that spot until my knees shook, whispering, "Goodbye, my love," before I forced myself to move on. Every corner of that house carried echoes. The porch where I'd waited for my father who never came back. The dining table where David once carved his initials with a pocket knife, swearing me to secrecy. The bathroom mirror where Henry kissed the top of my head every morning while shaving. The staircase where Christmas stockings once hung. Each room whispered a memory, and each memory tried to hold me there. But I couldn't stay. Not anymore. When the movers finished loading the few items I'd chosen, I walked slowly through the house one last time. I didn't touch the furniture or the walls. I just looked. Looked at the empty shelves, the bare floors, the ghosts that lingered in the corners. On the kitchen counter, I placed the house key in a small envelope. Inside, I slipped a folded note. "Don't look for me. Don't call me. I am exactly where I belong." I set the envelope down gently, like a final period at the end of a long chapter. Then I turned and walked out the door. The movers shut the truck, the latch clanging shut like a seal. I climbed into the cab, quilt clutched in my lap. As the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, I felt the ache of leaving, but also the quiet relief of release. That house had held my life, my love, my losses, but it no longer held me, and I was finally ready to belong somewhere else. The drive to Willow Grove took less than 2 hours, but it felt like I had crossed into another world. When the moving truck turned down the tree-lined road, I caught my first glimpse of the sign, "Willow Grove, independent living for seniors with dignity." The words shimmered in the afternoon sun, simple but powerful, with dignity. That was what I had been missing. The building itself was modest, made of pale brick with wide windows that let the light pour through. A fountain bubbled quietly near the entrance, and I saw a small group of residents chatting on a bench beneath a willow tree, their laughter drifting into the breeze. No one looked rushed. No one looked impatient. They simply looked present. The front door slid open automatically as I approached, quilt folded carefully in my arms. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something sweet, maybe cookies fresh from the kitchen. Soft jazz played in the background, a saxophone humming low and smooth. The light from the wide windows made the hallways glow. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the urge to breathe deep. A young woman at the front desk stood the moment she saw me. Her smile was warm, not practiced, and when she spoke, it wasn't with pity, it was with respect. "Welcome, Mrs. Whitmore. We've been expecting you." The sound of my name, spoken like it mattered, caught me off guard. At the airport, I'd been nothing but a boarding error, a voided ticket. Here, I was Clara Whitmore, seen and acknowledged. She handed me a woven basket wrapped in cellophane. Inside were jars of homemade jam, a box of crackers, a small plant in a clay pot, and a handwritten note. "We're glad you're here. This is your home now." I blinked hard against the tears that rose uninvited. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching the basket as though it were made of gold. A staff member showed me to my new room. It wasn't large, but it was bright. A window overlooked the courtyard where birds darted between feeders. My chair, the one Henry had sat in for decades, was already placed near the window. On the bedside table sat a welcome card signed by the director herself. I sat in the chair for a long moment, running my hand over the worn armrest. The world outside had not crumbled. Instead, it had opened, just enough for me to step in. Later that evening, I ventured into the common room. The space was alive with quiet chatter. A group of residents gathered around a large table, books spread before them. Others played cards. A record player spun gently in the corner, carrying jazz into every corner of the room. That's when I met Eleanor Brooks. She was a retired teacher with silver hair, cut short, sharp glasses perched on her nose, and the kind of wit that revealed itself in every sentence. "Well, look who's new," she said, eyeing me with mock seriousness. "You must be Clara. They told us you were coming today. I'm Eleanor, and don't let these glasses fool you. I can still spot a grammar mistake from 10 feet away." I laughed before I realized I was laughing, the sound surprising even me. "Nice to meet you, Eleanor." Beside her sat Irene Collins, a widow a few years older than me. Her eyes were soft, her voice gentle, the kind that made you feel understood before you even finished your sentence. "We're glad you're here," she said simply. "It can be hard starting over, but you won't have to do it alone." Those words wrapped around me like my mother's quilt. They pulled out a chair, motioning for me to sit. "We're in the middle of book club," Eleanor explained. "Don't worry, you don't need to catch up. Half the time, we end up arguing about the characters more than actually reading." Irene added, "And if you prefer art, there's a watercolor class on Thursdays. You should come, it's good for the soul." For a moment, I hesitated. My instinct was still to hold back, to remain polite but distant. After all, the people I loved most had turned away from me. But looking into Eleanor's mischievous grin and Irene's kind eyes, something in me softened. "I'd like that," I said. "Both, actually." That night, back in my room, I unpacked the small box of photographs and set them on the dresser. Henry in uniform, David as a baby, our wedding picture. I laid the quilt across the bed, smoothed the wrinkles, and sat for a long time just listening. The hallway hummed with footsteps, soft knocks at doors, the occasional burst of laughter. For the first time since Henry passed, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Because here, silence wasn't loneliness, it was peace. As I turned off the lamp, I thought of the words I had written in my letter to Elder Haven. "You are not invisible. You are not worthless." And lying in that bed, in a place where my name was spoken with care, I finally believed it for myself. The days at Willow Grove began to slip into a rhythm, but not the kind of rhythm that dulled life. It was one that stirred it awake. Each morning, sunlight spilled across the wide hallways, footsteps echoed gently, and someone always knocked at my door before breakfast just to say, "Good morning, Clara. We saved you a seat." The first invitation came from Eleanor. She poked her head into my room one Tuesday afternoon, her glasses sliding down her nose. "Book club, Whitmore. You can't hide in that chair forever. Besides, we need a tiebreaker." I followed her down the hallway into the lounge, where 6 residents gathered around a long oak table. Paperbacks were stacked in front of them, cups of tea cooling beside them. The book that week was a mystery novel, but the discussion had already veered wildly. "I'm telling you," Eleanor declared, waving her pencil like a gavel, "the butler didn't do it. It's too obvious." "Yes, but sometimes the obvious answer is the right one," argued Harold, a soft-spoken retired accountant. Voices overlapped, laughter broke out, and then someone turned to me. "What do you think, Clara?" I froze. They were all waiting, really waiting, for my opinion. No one had looked at me like that in years. I cleared my throat. "I think it wasn't the butler or the cousin. It was the narrator. He knew too much." The table erupted. "Yes!" Eleanor clapped the table. "Finally, someone with sense." I laughed, cheeks warm. It wasn't just about the book. It was about being heard, about knowing my voice mattered again. A few days later, Irene persuaded me to join the watercolor class. "Don't worry about steady hands," she said softly, placing a brush into my palm. "It's about what you feel, not how it looks." My hand trembled as I dipped the brush into blue paint. The first strokes were uneven, the lines shaky. For a moment, I almost set it down. But Eleanor leaned over, peering at my page. "Looks like sky," she said. "And don't we all need more sky?" I smiled and kept painting. By the end of the class, my paper was a mess of bold colors and clumsy shapes, but it was mine. For the first time since Henry died, I had created something just for me. The real turning point came at the weekly sing-along. I hadn't sung in years, not even at church after Henry passed. My voice had felt locked away like grief had chained it. But when the group began a familiar old tune, "You Are My Sunshine," something inside me loosened. At first, I only mouthed the words. Then Irene nudged me gently. "Sing, Clara." So I did. Softly at first, then louder. My voice wavered, cracked, but it carried. Eleanor harmonized off-key, Harold clapped on the wrong beat, and soon the whole room filled with voices. When the song ended, people clapped, not because I had sung well, but because I had sung at all. I felt tears on my cheeks, but they weren't heavy this time. They were light, cleansing. That night, back in my room, I sat by the window with Henry's photograph on the table beside me. The courtyard lights twinkled outside, laughter drifted faintly from the lounge, and I whispered, "Henry, I'm okay. More than okay." And I meant it. For years, I had lived as though my worth was measured by how much I could give. Money, time, patience, to people who only took. Now, I was learning to measure it by something else. How much joy I allowed myself to feel. In Willow Grove, I wasn't invisible. I was part of something again. And in the simple act of reading a book, painting a crooked sky, or raising my voice in song, I had found pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. The small notebook lay open on my lap, its lined pages waiting patiently. I hadn't kept a diary in decades, not since I was a young mother jotting down grocery lists and David's milestones. But here at Willow Grove, I had picked up the habit again. The director often encouraged new residents to write their thoughts. She said it helped us mark not just time, but meaning. That evening, the common room buzzed softly beyond my door. I could hear Eleanor's laughter down the hall, bright and unfiltered. Somewhere, Irene's gentle voice floated over a game of cards. The world outside my room was alive, but I chose the quiet. The lamp cast a warm circle of light over the paper, my pen heavy in my hand. I began to write. Family isn't blood. Family is who waits for you at the table. It's who saves you a chair, who asks for your opinion, who notices when you don't show up. Blood can abandon you. Blood can humiliate you. But real family, chosen family, doesn't. They wait. They care. They see you. I paused, pressing the pen against the page. The truth of those words settled over me. For years I had thought family was something you were born into, something unchangeable. But the last few months had proven otherwise. I thought of Eleanor, leaning across the book club table, demanding my thoughts on a plot twist. I thought of Irene, handing me a brush and insisting that my shaky sky was beautiful. I thought of the sing-along, voices clashing in joyful chaos, and the way everyone clapped simply because I dared to sing. That was family, not because we shared a name, but because we shared presence. I turned to a fresh page. My handwriting was slower now, but steady. "Henry, love, they think I've lost everything. They think leaving me at that airport broke me. But the truth is, I found myself again. I found a place where my name is spoken with kindness, where laughter fills the air, where silence is gentle instead of cruel. They thought they erased me. But you know what? I rewrote myself. I let the tears fall freely this time, not out of grief, but gratitude. The kind that comes when you realize you've survived the storm and stepped into sunlight. I kept writing. "Henry, I carry you with me every day. In the quilt, in the chair, in the photo by my bed. You taught me love wasn't about possessions or promises written in ink. It was about presence. And though you're gone, your presence still fills me. It was your voice that pushed me to stand up. Your memory that gave me the courage to walk out of that airport. Your trust that led me back to Walter. And now, it's your love that lets me build this new life without fear." I set the pen down and ran my fingers over the ink, as if sealing the words into place. Outside my window, the courtyard lights glowed softly, casting long shadows of the willow trees across the lawn. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint notes of jazz drifting from the lounge. My neighbors were gathering, saving me a seat even if I hadn't yet joined them. And I realized I wasn't writing just for me. I was writing for the woman I used to be, the one who sat on a porch at 9 years old waiting for a father who never came, for the widow who packed her suitcase for a trip she was never meant to return from, for every person who has ever been told they were too much or not enough. I picked up the pen one last time that night. To whoever finds these words someday, you are not invisible. You are not finished. You are not defined by the ones who failed to love you. You belong, even if you have to build belonging from scratch. And if you're reading this, know that I saved you a seat at the table in my heart. I closed the notebook, slid it into the drawer beside my bed, and exhaled. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. The phone rang again. I had left it on the nightstand face down, but I didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. For 3 days now, the calls had come in waves. Mornings, afternoons, even past midnight. Always the same name flashing across the glass, David. Once, that name would have sent me hurrying across the room, eager to hear his voice, ready to listen no matter what he had to say. But now, it only reminded me of silence. The silence he kept at the airport when I begged him with my eyes to defend me, to stand up, to act like my son. The phone buzzed again, insistent, a metallic whine against the wood. I reached over, lifted it in my palm, and stared at the screen. 23 missed calls. The new one flashing, waiting. My reflection shimmered faintly in the black glass. For a moment, I almost answered. Habit tugged at me, the old part of me that still wanted to believe in second chances. But then I thought of Eleanor, waving at me from the book club table, demanding my opinion. I thought of Irene, pressing a brush into my trembling hand. I thought of the way the dining room lights glowed each evening, the sound of chairs scraping, the burst of laughter spilling out into the hall, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I smiled. Not bitter, not triumphant, just sure. Then I pressed the red button, silencing the call. I stood, smoothing the quilt across my bed, and slipped my phone into the drawer. I didn't need it to tell me who I was anymore. The hallway outside buzzed with life. Soft footsteps, a burst of laughter, the smell of dinner drifting from the kitchen, roast chicken maybe, or soup thick with herbs. Someone knocked gently on my door. Clara, dinner's ready. We saved you a seat. My chest warmed at those words. Family. Not the kind bound by blood, but the kind bound by presence, by care. I opened the door, stepping into the golden light of the hallway. The carpet was soft beneath my feet, the walls glowing with the reflection of sconces. As I walked toward the dining room, I heard voices weaving together. Stories, jokes, the simple music of people glad to be near one another. And then I saw it. The long table glowed under warm lights. Plates and glasses sparkled. Bread baskets were passed from hand to hand. Eleanor raised her glass mid-joke. Irene leaned forward to listen, and at the far end a chair stood waiting. My chair. I walked toward it, the sound of laughter growing louder, steadier, the smell of food richer, the light brighter. Behind me, the phone in my drawer may have rung again, but it no longer mattered. Because home isn't where your name is written on a will. Home isn't who you wait for at airports or porches. Home is where you are wanted, where they notice if you don't show up, where someone saves you a seat. I sat down, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like family, and as the laughter rose around me, filling the room, I let the sound wash over me like music.